Hey folks, it's Patriot Nurse. Thanks for joining me today in this video. We're going to discuss the upcoming unwinding of our economy that's scheduled to take place in October and November and how you can shield yourself against these realities. There are really four main reasons why we're looking at a major unwinding happening in October, November of this year. And I want to go over those reasons with you today. And also let's unpack some strategies we can use to shield ourselves against the fall, basically. So there are four main factors that are contributing to the upcoming economic reality check that we're going to be seeing here probably within the next month to 2 months. And that's number one, the sell-off of Airbnbs. 2, student debt repayments. 3, construction being funded primarily by government money. And then 4, credit card debt. So the first of these realities and the reasons why we are looking at October and November being really the timeline where we can expect this unwinding to really start. Airbnbs are affecting the real estate market and particularly single family homes, right? So a lot of the turmoil that we are dealing with from an economic standpoint is driven by the housing market. But the housing market in and of itself is not an island. It's affected, for those of you who are in real estate, obviously you know it's affected by a variety of factors. When you look at historically the number of homes that are for sale right now compared to the average, it's about half of, as far as volume of what historically the average number of single family homes for sale at any given time is. Roughly about, I think, 650,000 last time I checked in the United States, available homes for sale. This is one of the reasons, there are many, this is one of the reasons why housing is at a fairly unprecedented level of unaffordability compared to the average and median household incomes. So if you've only got about half of the overall volume and available supply, it doesn't take that much to move the needle. This is where the Airbnb market plays in and why we should really pay attention to it. The Airbnb market, as with any new startup and any new type of sector in an economy that's growing and that has not been regulated yet, the government is going to find a way to extract wealth out of that process. And they're also going to find ways to regulate that new process. So as Airbnbs are and short-term rentals are increasingly falling under more and more government regulation, it's becoming an onerous level of regulatory burden for a lot of these smaller owners who only have 1, 2, maybe 3 properties. Not so much an issue with people who own dozens of these properties, but the smaller real estate investor who'd been using this, they're feeling the pinch of this regulation. And this is spreading across the country. New York is the focal point of this right now, because there's roughly, I think, 40,000 Airbnbs, something like that, in the city of New York in and of itself. When you look at Austin, for instance, in Texas, I think that's another 30,000. And Dallas is starting to regulate these. As regulatory burden increases, it's going to make it a less desirable place to do business. And eventually, the math just doesn't weigh out for people and they're going to sell. Now you may say, okay, well, it's not really that much. It's not going to make a huge difference. There are bigger entities like, for instance, BlackRock and some of these corporate commercial entities that are buying up single family homes. Yeah, that's a part of it. But here's the thing. If you only have 650,000 homes, half relatively of the historical normal volume, it doesn't take that much to move the needle. So if you only have 65,000 homes that go for sale in the entirety of the United States, secondary to regulatory burden, that's going to move the needle. And it will begin the cascade of effects, ultimately, that start the sell-off in the real estate market. Now, again, I'm a nurse and a master herbalist, but I just look at reality and I look at history and I look at numbers, right? Numbers matter. And these are numbers that it behooves us to pay attention to, because as these single family homes are liquidated, it's going to, if it comes when I think it's going to come, create a cascade of effects that really is going to signal the unwinding of the real estate market. Now, some people might say, okay, well, why do we have to be concerned about this? Because the baby boomers who on average, and the generations matter. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Generations matter. It's not just a broad brush of painting people with traits. Generations spend money differently, and the way that money moves in economies, that has a direct impact on how the reality of wealth is felt at the ground level. Most of the wealth that the baby boomers have, where is it? Is it in stocks and bonds? No. It's in real estate. It's in their house. So their relative perception of wealth overall is much higher now compared to where it's going to be when this sell-off starts. And those home equity loans that people have taken out, they might find that it's not such a good position to be in if their house relative value has dropped 40 to 50%. So that's a reality to look at around the corner. Number 2, student loan debt repayments. This is huge. So during the pandemic, these student loan repayment programs were effectively halted. But they are set to resume, Sunday, I think it is? As the student loan debt repayments begin, this is going to trigger a massive drop in available disposable income for people. Now, some people might argue, well, they got themselves into that place and it's their fault. Okay, fine, whatever. People sign their name on the dotted lines. I'm not arguing that. Here's the reality of the numbers, though. Over 60% of households in the United States across income strata, not just the lower class, not just the lower middle class, upper class, 60% of all households in the United States are living paycheck to paycheck already. That number has probably increased since that metric was obtained. When you put on top of that paycheck to paycheck, just breaking even each month, an additional average of $400 a month in student loan debt repayments, that's broken. That's broken. That's it. So people end up having to either drastically cut their spending, drastically refinance things, or take out loans, further indebting themselves, or not pay and risk further financial problems affecting their credit score and many other things. The student loan debt repayments are going to take on average $400 a month out of the pockets of people who already on average were just barely able to cover their expenses in the first place. That's going to create some serious problems. The third is that new construction is primarily being financed by government-funded initiatives. Real estate in the commercial world is in a collapse. It's in a free fall. This is one of the reasons why even in building up and sprawling areas, you see these ghost towns of formerly thriving retail space. And in general, this commercial real estate collapse is really reflective of a fundamental change in the way that money is moving in our economy and the way that people are using spaces. The new construction boom that is happening, much of this is happening because of government spending. Government spending that is at essentially wartime levels brought on by the pandemic, and it has not been reined in yet. Eventually, the price discovery mechanism of this is going to correct. Governments can only prop up markets for so long before both of them implode. The fourth is credit card debt. So this kind of ties into the second point about student loan debt, but also it is reflective of the increase in cost of living and also runaway inflation. Much of the advertising for short-term loans is now not just payday loans. This is loans that are targeted primarily towards paying groceries, towards paying rent, and towards financing smaller purchases under $200 for things like children's school essentials or items for growing families. This expansion in short-term credit is reflective of an underlying serious problem in funds, in liquidity, and in purchasing power with the dollar. Now, when you look at the way that interest rates have behaved recently, these interest rates have risen according to the way the Fed has tried to get a hold of inflation. But we look at interest rates primarily as a metric of like how housing is affordable or not affordable according to what percentage rate you can get the loan at. But these percentages on interest rates affect the entirety of the money system, including the consumer end of credit card usages. So in many cases, people are seeing the price of using credit cards, the percentage overall of interest that they're paying, skyrocket, anywhere up of 18 to 21% for just credit card debt. As we've established, over 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. When all of this starts coming in, like what we're seeing now, and start to spiral and come to fruition, this is creating a perfect storm of issues when the United States is effectively the weakest that it's been from a monetary standpoint, from an economic standpoint. We produce less overall in durable goods than probably we ever have in modern reckoning. We have become increasingly service dependent, which is a problem because if you're not producing something, you are essentially trading services for services in a service-based industry. A woman may, for instance, be an accountant or be a financial advisor, but she's paying through the nose for childcare. Or an attorney, for instance, may be making bank, but he's got a ton of student loan debt and he's got a whole bunch of ulcers and healthcare related issues that he's got to spend money on as well. So as we've moved service to service, more and more wealth is being extracted. And as more and more wealth gets extracted and less is actually hard produced in physical assets, people are more and more susceptible to these swings in the economy. So we've gone over these major issues. Now let's talk about how we shield ourselves from them. So the 4 things we talked about are the upcoming Airbnb sell-off related to regulatory demands by local governments and state governments. 2 is the student loan debt repayment pause starting back up again. 3 is the new construction that's primarily financed by the government spending. And then 4 is the credit card issue. All of these are essentially layers that could serve either in isolation or in concert as major catalysts for the unwinding. We have a weakness in the economy, which most people recognize is fundamental at this point. Our dollar is worth less. Our purchasing power is worth less because they printed more of these fake dollars. And if you are holding dollars and they start printing more dollars, and the dollars that you are holding become relatively worth less. So you're better served having dollars further back in the fewer permutations of the monopoly board than holding them now. One of the ways that peoples across the world in times past and in times present have tried to diversify against these type of unwinding scenarios is to hold assets that are physical and that are not digital and that are not subject to depreciation and to more and more inflationary spending and inflationary printing from the central banks that are issuing this currency, these debt instruments. As far as shielding ourselves, there are practical steps that we need to take. And the first is food security. So food security and owning your food is just part of the equation. Most people in the United States do not live on farms anymore. And that's a huge problem, really worthy of its own separate video. But the impact of the de-agrarianization of the United States cannot be overstated. Because people moved forward towards the service-based economy, away from farms, more towards urban and suburban areas, they became more service dependent and by default more debt dependent. Getting ourselves out of debt, owning food production is a huge step towards self-sufficiency, which can help shield us from this. Bottom line is you're going to have to eat no matter what. If you have food stored up or if you have production that can serve you, even if it's just a little tomato plant, or I know it's getting kind of late in the season, but kale growing in a space, or Swiss chard, or something that is nutrient dense, also that usually costs quite a lot to purchase at the store. If you have these producing for you, you're going to be shielded and the impact is going to be softened, relatively speaking. Second thing, in times of economic uncertainty, people lose their flipping minds. And governments also become more and more heavy-handed because these governments, the same ones that got us into the trouble in the first place with all of this quantitative easing and free money printing, these governments have to backpedal and then justify their existence. So how do they justify their existence in the midst of a problem they created? They wait for people to start spiraling. They wait for the looting in urban areas to get crazy. They wait for an outbreak of chaos, and then they come in heavy-handed with the iron fist. We will restore law and order. Because people will always cry out for a savior. They will always cry out for someone, anybody, to make them feel so safe from the boogeyman. If you can provide your own safety and not have to rely on government entities to enforce your rights of life and property, then you're going to be better suited in the grand scheme of things. And this is more than just stockpiling ammo. This is more than just having a safe full of weapons that have lovingly been polished and never been put to use. This is owning your responsibility, particularly as an American. You have a responsibility to be the defender of your life and your property, your possessions in your neighborhood. This is what the militia is. The militia is not some wacko group of people running around in tinfoil hats and mismanaged camo. The militia was from the beginning intended to serve as the front line for keeping order and peace in local communities and to serve as a defense against an onslaught from a foreign invader. So being able to defend yourself, this would be the bullets portion of the beans, bullets and band-aids. Being able to defend yourself against the crazy that's coming, that's huge. And the third is the band-aids. So as we've developed these ideas, these are primarily economic in their implications. But if you, for instance, do a quick survey on human emotional spectrum and what causes people to have trouble in their relationships, money is usually way up there. Number one in marriage, for instance. People have an emotional attachment to money, and when they feel afraid that their money isn't worth anything, that their money doesn't buy anything, and that no longer are they able to perpetuate, very important, to perpetuate their previously assumed normative standards of living. That's a mouthful, but it has impact. When people's world and their standard of living has been snatched from them, they don't tend to compensate well, especially if there's no hope for reinstitution of that assumed level of comfort. People lose their minds, and when they do that, they act out in the most basal of human instincts, which usually is towards violence. So being able to shield yourself against it is huge. And then the third is the band-aids. This decoupling and this unraveling that we are seeing is economic primarily in its impact and in its origin. But all of these things will go towards the inevitable conclusion of having people experience the rug being snatched out from under them, the rug of societal cushiness, the rug of specification of jobs. The only reason we have been able to outsource, oh, I feel sick, let's go to the doctor, who's somehow super accessible now compared to, the past 80, 90 years. More accessible healthcare, by the way, in the United States has not yielded better healthcare options. People are sicker now than they ever have been. They're living longer, but they're living with more comorbidities. So increasing healthcare access, which is one of the favorite things that the Democrats and leftists love to push, increasing healthcare access doesn't necessarily improve outcomes. All it does is create another revenue extraction stream for the government. Being able to be your own doctor, so to speak, and being able to care for yourself, that's critical. You have to be able to do this in some way, shape, or form. You may not be 100% self-sufficient, but you have got to decrease your dependence upon these people. It is the primary engineered way that this system is going to extract wealth out of the baby boomers. If you're a baby boomer, they are coming after your wealth through property taxes and through healthcare, the cost of healthcare. So the way that you shield yourself against this is to be able to provide your own services. And even if you're not a baby boomer, even if you're just someone who wants to be more self-sufficient, the less that we select into their power grid, the more of our own agency and the more of our own power and the more of our own options we retain. And we must embrace this fiercely with determination in the days to come. They scare people with the manufactured crises that they themselves have architected and then offer them solutions which ultimately result in slavery. And the medical industrial complex is a huge part of this. Self-selecting out of their power and choosing instead to provide your own services, this is how you free yourself from their grip. But you can only do this if you're willing to educate yourself and spend the time and the energy and the money to doing it. If you want options for free, you can obviously watch all the free content that I have here on YouTube. Also, you can go to your library and find resources there as well. If you'd like to train with me in an online course format, I have a course that I've created. It's 4 hours, it's $129, and that link is down below. Also, let's say, for instance, that you've trained with me or you have a background, for instance, in medicine or in alternative medicine, and you're looking, for instance, for supplies. On my website, thepatriotnurse.com, we have an herbal supply section, and we have the Dr. Christopher's Medical Kit, which is a kit that I myself, whenever I leave home, I don't leave home without it. It is my go-to, my one-stop shop to grab and go, to have herbal support with me. And also, we've added options on the website for you to add 2 reference books on there that I recommend. One is the Herbal Home Healthcare book, which is the $15 add-on, and it's essentially the quick reference for this kit. And then number 2 is the School of Natural Healing, the Big Gold Book. I call it. My students in class will know this. But the Big Gold Book's about $100, but it's money well spent. It's like a gold brick. And if I can only have, outside of the scriptures, if I can only have one book to take with me on the road, that's the one I'm running away with. So these options for purchase for supplies are available on the website, thepatriotnurse.com, but also the course availability for training. That's also, you can find that link in the description box below, and it's also available at the website, thepatriotnurse.com. So friends, to recap and to wrap our head around what the reality is in front of us, we will be increasingly facing the weaponized fallout of an economy that is in distress. And from a practical standpoint, there's no voting this out. The people who have caused this are beyond the reach of the voting and electoral process. Central banks are beyond the reach of people going to the ballots and punching their little holes or coloring in the little lines or pushing the little buttons, which may or may not record the right vote selection. But this is not going to get fixed through the electoral process. It doesn't matter who the president is. As long as these central banks are creating the currency, there really is nothing that we can do from an electoral process to fix it. So it's on us. It's on us to be able to take care of things. I hope the video was helpful for y'all. Whether it's the Airbnb sell-off or the student debt repayment or the collapse in construction and retail space and really the fallout of credit card debt skyrocketing, all this is leading inexorably towards a currency reset. And that's really the take-home message that I'm trying to prepare people for. This is going to be very, very thorny. And historically, whenever currencies are reset, it is not a peaceful thing. It's met with a lot of problems. And you can rest assured that whatever their attempt is at resetting this currency issue and trying to reboot it, that it will not go well for people who have lived responsibly. They are going to attempt to. The federal government is the most wicked, and I submit to you, rights oppressive entity in the United States. They have become the single greatest oppressor of the rights of the people who live in the United States. And ultimately, the more that we can select away from their power and select towards our own agency and our own self-sufficiency, the better that we're going to be suited to ride this thing out and to ultimately emerge victorious on the other side. But I know who wins, because aside from the Big Gold Book, the book that I would diddy mow with and bug out with, aside from that book, we know that we have the scriptures, and the Lord's promises endure forever. So regardless, like, nations are in an uproar and kingdoms come and go, but his word remains forever. And it is firm and reliable, fixed in the heavens for us. That ultimately is where my faith is. I want to be a servant, so that way I am better equipped to minister to people, to love on people, and to be responsible with what he's given me and to be a good steward of it. So hope the video was helpful for y'all. Thanks for staying with me. Thank you for continuing, just as an update for my own health. Thank you for continuing to pray for me. Another week of physical therapy, rehabbing from the car crash that I was in. Just pushing through, guys, pushing through. So I would appreciate your continued prayers for my health. And I'm trying to, continue making videos for y'all. But I tell you what, man, like, when you spend a lot of the day just trying to get through it, hurting and looking for, as best as possible, ways just to push through it, it's, you know how it is. So the videos are made with love because I care about y'all, and I want to make sure that you get quality information and really that you're encouraged, because I know how it is out there in the world full of crazy when people are just too busy worrying about stuff that frankly doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. The viewers of this channel and my followers, y'all know what the big priorities are in this world, and you know what has eternal value. And so I want to be able to equip folks in this life to sow into eternity as best as possible. Have a great weekend, y'all. May the Lord bless and keep you. And for those of you who are celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, Chag Sameach, and happy Feast of Tabernacles. Enjoy your holiday and enjoy your family and love on your people. For now, it's Patriot Nurse signing off, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.